The first time I witnessed it, I thought my optical sensors had malfunctioned. I am Krell Thax, senior xenobiologist aboard the research vessel Time's Wandering Thought *, and I have spent the better part of 300 cycles studying the predatory hierarchies of the galaxy's most dangerous ecosystems. I have documented the feeding patterns of acid-dripping Vorthax on Kepler 9. I have catalogued the hunting strategies of the 8-legged shrike stalkers of Proxima's death forests. I have even survived, barely, an encounter with a void worm in the sulfur swamps of Titan's southern hemisphere. Nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I saw that day on the human colony world they call New Manitoba. The settlement was small, maybe 5,000 souls, carved into the edge of what the humans cheerfully referred to as the Murderwoods. Yes, you heard that correctly. They named it the Murderwoods, then built their homes right next to it. Because of course they did. Humans have this peculiar habit of looking at things that could kill them and saying, you know what, I think I'll live there. The Murderwoods, despite its rather on-the-nose designation, was actually one of the more terrifying biomes I had encountered in my travels. The trees themselves were predatory, their roots capable of erupting from the ground to snare prey. The canopy housed no less than 17 species of carnivorous birds, each more creative in their killing methods than the last. And prowling through it all were the Thornback Grizzlies, 3-ton apex predators with claws that could shred titanium plating and an appetite that bordered on astronomical. Our mission was simple: study the ecosystem, understand the food chain, file our reports, and leave before something decided we looked tasty. Standard protocol for surveys of death worlds. Then I met Emma Kowalski and her badger, Mr. Patches. Emma was 7 years old, give or take, with hair the color of autumn wheat, and a gap-toothed smile that seemed entirely too cheerful for someone living on the edge of certain death. She wore pink boots covered in mud, denim overalls with one strap perpetually undone, and carried a backpack shaped like a cartoon animal I did not recognize. Mr. Patches was not a cartoon. Mr. Patches was a Terran badger, which I learned is a mustelid, which is apparently a family of creatures that evolution designed with the specific purpose of being absolutely unhinged. He was perhaps 30 pounds of black and white fury, with claws designed for digging and an attitude that suggested he had personally fought God and won. I first encountered them on day 4 of our survey. I had been setting up monitoring equipment near the forest's edge, about 100 meters from the settlement's perimeter. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I hadn't been acutely aware that twilight was prime hunting time for approximately 90% of the things that wanted to eat me. I was calibrating a motion sensor when I heard it. Humming. Someone was humming. I turned, mandibles clicking in confusion, to see a small human child skipping, down the path toward the Murderwoods. The badger waddled beside her, occasionally stopping to dig at interesting smells in the dirt. "Excuse me," I called out, my translator rendering my clicks and whistles into serviceable human English. "Small human, you should not be here. This area is extremely dangerous." Emma stopped skipping and looked at me with the kind of patient expression usually reserved for the very old or the very slow. "Hi, you must be one of the scientists. I'm Emma, and this is Mr. Patches. Are you studying the forest? My dad says you're from space. Is space cool? Do you eat regular food or special space food?" The badger, Mr. Patches, regarded me with black eyes that held absolutely zero fear, and possibly a hint of judgment. Yes, I am Krell Thax, and you need to return to the settlement immediately. Do you not understand? There are Thornback Grizzlies in these woods, Razorwing hawks, strangler vines that could— "Oh yeah, we know," Emma said, adjusting her backpack. "That's why we're going for a walk before dinner. Mr. Patches likes to stretch his legs, and I need to return Mrs. Henderson's book. She lives on the other side of the village, and the forest path is way faster than going around." I stared at her, then at the badger, then back at her. "You are going to walk through the Murderwoods to return a book. It's overdue," Emma explained seriously. "Mrs. Henderson is very strict about late fees." Before I could protest further, before I could explain in detail exactly how many ways she could die in the next 10 minutes, Emma waved cheerfully and continued down the path. Mr. Patches gave me one last look that clearly communicated his opinion of my concerns, then followed his small human into the forest. I did what any responsible xenobiologist would do. I grabbed my equipment and followed them, determined to at least document the tragic demise of this foolish child for the educational benefit of future researchers. The forest swallowed us within minutes. The canopy above filtered the fading sunlight into a greenish gloom, and every shadow seemed to hide something with too many teeth. My sensory antennae picked up movement all around us, the rustle of leaves that had nothing to do with wind, the crack of branches under weights that should not be there, the low growls that seemed to come from the earth itself. Emma continued humming, some human tune I did not recognize, bouncing along the path without a care in the universe. Mr. Patches snuffled through the undergrowth, occasionally making small chittering sounds that I assumed were badger language for, yes, yes, everything smells interesting. Then I saw it. Movement in the shadows to our left. Something big. My thermal sensors confirmed it. A Thornback Grizzly, and a large one. Easily 3.5 tons, with the distinctive ridge of bony protrusions along its spine that gave the species its name. It was tracking us, moving parallel to our path with the practiced silence of an apex predator. Emma, I whispered urgently, trying to keep my voice steady. Do not make sudden movements, but there is a Thornback Grizzly approximately 20 meters to our left. Oh, that's probably Big Bertha, Emma said without breaking stride. She's got a den around here somewhere. I think she had cubs last spring. The creature, Big Bertha apparently, moved closer. I could see her now through the gaps in the trees, a mountain of muscle and claws and terrible, terrible hunger. She was definitely stalking us. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to run, to climb, to burrow, to do anything except continue walking down this path like prey on a dinner plate. Big Bertha emerged from the tree line. She was magnificent and horrifying in equal measure. Her claws gouged furrows in the forest floor. Her breath misted in the cooling air. Her eyes locked onto us with the focus of a predator who had not eaten in days. And then, she stopped. Just stopped. Mid-stalk. Mid-hunt. Mid-everything. Emma waved. Hi, Bertha. The Thornback Grizzly, 3.5 tons of evolution's finest killing machine, sat down. Just sat down on her haunches like an oversized domestic pet. Her mouth hung open slightly, and if I did not know better, I would have said she looked confused. Mr. Patches looked up from the interesting rock he had been investigating, saw the grizzly, and made a sound. I cannot adequately describe it. It was part grunt, part growl, part declaration of territorial supremacy. It roughly translated to, yes, I see you, and I am not impressed. The grizzly's ears flattened against her skull. Emma knelt down and pulled something from her backpack. I don't have any salmon today, Bertha. Sorry. But I've got half a sandwich from lunch. It's peanut butter and jelly. You like those, right? She tossed the sandwich. The apex predator of the Murderwoods, the terror of the forest, the thing that could disembowel a bull moose with one swipe, gently caught the sandwich in her jaws and ate it with surprising delicacy. Good girl, Emma said approvingly. We've got to go now. Mrs. Henderson's book is really overdue. We walked on. Big Bertha watched us go, made no move to follow, and eventually ambled back into the forest. I was too stunned to speak. We encountered 3 more predators on that walk. A pack of Razorwing hawks circled overhead, their metallic feathers glinting in the dying light. They were coordinated hunters, known to strip a full-grown elk to bones in under 2 minutes. They saw Emma and Mr. Patches, and suddenly developed an intense interest in flying somewhere, anywhere else. A strangler vine, disturbed by Mr. Patch's digging, began to emerge from the soil. Its tendrils were covered in thorns that secreted a paralytic toxin. Emma noticed it and said, "No, thank you," in the same tone one might use to decline an unwanted vegetable at dinner. The vine retreated back underground, and then there was the incident with the shadow cat. Shadow cats are solitary ambush predators, roughly the size of a Terran tiger but with the added advantage of partial phase-shifting abilities. They can move between solid matter for brief periods, making them nearly impossible to detect until they strike. I had them classified as one of the top 5 most dangerous creatures on the planet. This one materialized directly in front of us on the path, a ghost made solid, all rippling muscle and gleaming fangs. Its eyes glowed with an eerie green luminescence. Emma stopped walking. "Oh wow! Mr. Patches, look! It's one of the shy cats." The shadow cat, the apex assassin of the Murderwoods, trembled. Actually trembled. Mr. Patches, who stood maybe 18 inches tall at the shoulder, took 3 steps forward and made that sound again. That indefinable badger sound that seemed to reach into the primal core of every living thing and say, "I am small, yes, but I am also chaos incarnate, and you really do not want to test me today." The shadow cat phase shifted and disappeared so fast it left a small vacuum that made a popping sound. "Aw, it was shy," Emma said, sounding disappointed. Then she brightened. "But that means we're almost to Mrs. Henderson's house." We emerged from the Murderwoods on the other side of the village. The entire journey had taken perhaps 20 minutes. 20 minutes during which we should have died no less than 7 times by my count. 20 minutes, during which the most dangerous predators in this ecosystem had taken one look at a 7-year-old human child and her pet badger, and collectively decided that they had urgent business elsewhere. Emma returned her book, chatted with Mrs. Henderson about something called a bake sale, and then walked back through the forest. I followed in a daze. The return trip was, if anything, even more surreal. We passed Big Bertha again. She waved. I am not making this up. The Thornback Grizzly lifted one massive paw in what could only be described as a wave. Mr. Patches ignored her completely, more interested in a particularly aromatic patch of moss. When we finally reached the settlement's edge, Emma's mother was waiting. She was a tall woman with the same wheat-colored hair as her daughter and the kind of expression that suggested she was used to her child returning from mortal peril with stories about making friends. "Did you return Mrs. Henderson's book, sweetie?" And we saw Big Bertha and some Razorwing hawks and one of the shy cats. "That's nice, dear. Did you thank Mr. Patches for keeping you safe?" Emma crouched down and hugged the badger, who tolerated this with the patience of a saint. "Thank you, Mr. Patches. You're the best." The badger made a softer sound, almost affectionate, and licked Emma's face with a tongue that had probably been designed to strip bark from trees. Emma's mother noticed me standing there, probably looking like I had witnessed the heat death of the universe. "Oh, you must be one of the researchers. I'm Margaret Kowalski. I hope Emma didn't bother you too much." "Bother?" I managed to croak. We walked through the Murderwoods. With predators. Apex predators. They just left. They saw her and they left. Margaret smiled. "Oh yes. Emma's been walking that path since she was 5. The animals around here are pretty used to the kids. As long as they have one of the badgers with them, they're perfectly safe." "One of the badgers?" "Well, yes. Most families have one. They're excellent companions for children. Very protective." I looked at Mr. Patches, who was now rolling in the dirt, apparently trying to get the maximum amount of mud on his white fur. This creature, this 30-pound ball of attitude and claws, was considered an appropriate babysitter. But the Thornback Grizzlies, the shadow cats, they could easily. "Oh, they tried it first," Margaret said cheerfully. "When we first settled here about 10 years ago. But after a few encounters with the badgers, they learned. Predators are smart. They do cost-benefit analysis. And the cost of trying to eat a human child protected by a Terran badger," she shook her head, "way too high." That night, I returned to the Times Wandering Thought Times and began compiling my report. I watched the footage from my recording equipment again and again. I analyzed the behavior patterns, cross-referenced them with everything I knew about predator psychology, consulted the ship's extensive xenobiological database. The conclusion was inescapable, though it made no logical sense. The apex predators of New Manitoba, creatures that could kill and eat almost anything on the planet, had collectively decided that humans under a certain age were off limits. Not because the humans were dangerous themselves, not because the humans were poisonous or unpalatable, but because humanity had brought with them these small, furry psychopaths called badgers, and the local wildlife had learned through painful experience that humans with badgers were simply not worth the trouble. I thought about Big Bertha, sitting down like a scolded pet. I thought about the shadow cat, literally fleeing through dimensional space to escape. I thought about Emma, skipping through a death-world forest like it was a public park, protected by nothing more than 30 pounds of monochrome mammal with an attitude problem. And I realized something that would fundamentally change how I viewed humanity and their place in the galaxy. Humans did not survive by being the strongest or the fastest or the most deadly. They survived by forming partnerships with creatures that were absolutely unhinged, and then having the audacity to let their children go for walks with them. Somewhere in the Murderwoods, a Thornback Grizzly was probably rethinking her life choices. A shadow cat was likely developing a healthy respect for small mammals, and a pack of Razorwing hawks was learning that some prey, no matter how soft and squishy they appeared, came with protection plans that defied all conventional wisdom. As I prepared my initial report for the Galactic Biological Survey, I made a note to recommend that New Manitoba be upgraded from a Class 7 death world to a Class 3 moderate risk environment, not because the predators had become less dangerous, but because the humans had shown up with badgers. And apparently, that changed everything. 3 weeks after the incident with Emma and Mr. Patches, I thought I understood the situation. I was wrong. I was so magnificently, spectacularly wrong that it still keeps me awake during sleep cycles. The real education began when I met Thomas Hargrove and his badger, Colonel Mustard. Thomas was 9 years old, freckled, and possessed the kind of confidence that comes from never having experienced actual consequences. Colonel Mustard was larger than Mr. Patches, gray around the muzzle, and had a scar across his snout that suggested he had opinions and was willing to fight about them. I encountered them at the agricultural station on the outskirts of the settlement, where my team was studying pollinator interactions. Thomas was supposed to be helping his father with equipment maintenance. Instead, he was sitting on a fence post, eating an apple, while Colonel Mustard dug enormous holes in what I assumed was supposed to be a garden. Should he be doing that? I asked, pointing at the destruction. Thomas looked at the excavation project, then at me, then shrugged. Colonel's looking for grubs. Dad says the soil needed aeration anyway. Before I could respond, the emergency klaxon sounded. Not the settlement's alarm, but our ship's alert system. My communicator crackled to life with my assistant Vreenak's voice, high-pitched with panic. Krell, we have a situation. Pack of thornbacks. 6 of them. Moving toward the agricultural sector. They've never come this close to the settlement before. We need to evacuate everyone immediately. 6 Thornback Grizzlies. That was not a pack. That was an army. Each one capable of devastating carnage. Together, they could level the entire agricultural complex in minutes. I grabbed Thomas. We need to get inside. Now, lock all the doors. Thomas looked unconcerned. Why? Because of the bears? They are not bears. They are 3-ton apex predators with claws that can shred reinforced steel, and a hunting strategy that involves coordinated ambush tactics. Yeah, Thomas said, taking another bite of his apple. Bears. The ground began to tremble. Through the fields, I could see them coming. 6 massive thornbacks, moving with terrifying purpose. They were not hunting. They were marching. This was organized, deliberate. Something had driven them from their territories, forced them toward the settlement. The other researchers were scrambling for shelter. Farmers were running toward the reinforced buildings. Everyone was moving except Thomas and Colonel Mustard. Thomas, please. We have seconds before Colonel Mustard stopped digging. He looked up, dirt covering his snout, and assessed the approaching threat with the casual interest of someone checking the weather. Then he made a sound. If Mr. Patch's sound was a declaration of territorial supremacy, Colonel Mustard's sound was a war cry. It started low, built to a crescendo, and somehow managed to convey 3 distinct messages. I am here. This is my space, and your mother was a hamster, and your father smelt of elderberries. The lead thornback, a massive male with scars crisscrossing his hide, stopped so suddenly that the one behind him crashed into his rear end. Thomas slid off the fence. Colonel says they're scared of something. Something big pushed them out of their territory. How do you know what he says? He told me. Duh. Colonel Mustard waddled forward, positioning himself between Thomas and the Grizzlies. 6 against 1. 3 tons each versus 30 pounds of attitude and questionable life choices. The lead thornback lowered his head, a classic intimidation display. His claws gouged the earth. A growl rumbled from his chest like continental plates shifting. Colonel Mustard was unimpressed. He did not growl back. He did not puff up. He simply stood there, radiating an aura of, "I have fought things you cannot imagine, and I am still here." The standoff lasted maybe 10 seconds. Then the lead Thornback did something I had never seen in 300 cycles of studying predator behavior. He bowed. Not a full prostration, but a definite lowering of the head, a clear acknowledgement of, what? Dominance? Respect? The right of way? The other 5 followed suit. Then, moving as one, they turned and lumbered back toward the forest, giving the agricultural sector a wide berth. Thomas scratched Colonel Mustard behind the ears. "Good boy. You told those bears." My communicator exploded with confused chatter from my team. Vreenak's voice cut through. "Krell, what just happened? Why did they retreat?" I could not answer. I was too busy reevaluating everything I thought I knew about interspecies dynamics. That evening, the settlement held what they called a community meeting in the central hall. Apparently, the Thornback incident was unusual enough to warrant discussion. I attended, hoping for answers, prepared for confusion. What I got was enlightenment, delivered by a 12-year-old named Sophie Park and her badger, Admiral Butterscotch. Sophie stood at the podium, her badger sitting beside her like a furry advisor. "So," she began, with the authoritative tone of someone who had clearly given presentations before, "we think something moved into the upper forest. Something big enough to scare the Thornbacks out of their normal range." Margaret Kowalski, Emma's mother and apparently the settlement's unofficial wildlife liaison, nodded. "The question is what? We've mapped every major predator in the region. Nothing should be capable of displacing 6 adult Thornbacks." An older man, weather-beaten and practical, raised his hand. "Could be migrants. Sometimes packs from the southern continent cross the strait during mating season. Or," Sophie said dramatically, "it could be a Dreadmaw." The room went silent. I noticed several adults exchanging worried glances. "What?" I asked carefully. "Is a Dreadmaw?" Sophie's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of a child about to describe something absolutely horrifying. "They're super rare. Like, maybe 10 on the whole planet. They're basically if you took a Thornback Grizzly and made it twice as big and gave it armor plates and retractable claws and they're territorial." Margaret interrupted, shooting Sophie a look. "Very territorial. If one has moved into the upper forest, it could be a problem. We should check it out." Thomas volunteered immediately. Every adult in the room said no in unison. Thomas's father, a barrel-chested man named Marcus, shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. Dreadmaws are not like the other predators. They're aggressive, unpredictable, and they do not back down. Even the badgers can't." "Admiral Butterscotch could totally take a Dreadmaw," Sophie interjected. Admiral Butterscotch, who had been grooming himself, looked up and chittered what I assumed was agreement. "That is not the point," Margaret said. "The point is that if there is a Dreadmaw in the upper forest, we need to know about it. We need to understand its range, its behavior patterns, and whether it poses a threat to the settlement." She looked at me. "Krell Thax, you're a xenobiologist. Would you be willing to lead a survey team into the upper forest tomorrow? With proper precautions, of course." "Proper precautions." "Right. Because clearly, the solution to encountering a creature called a Dreadmaw was proper precautions." But I agreed. Of course I agreed. This was unprecedented data. A chance to observe apex predator displacement in real time, to understand the hierarchy of a death world ecosystem, to potentially discover a new alpha species. Also, I was curious. Sue me. The expedition was planned for dawn. My team would provide scientific equipment and documentation. The settlement would provide guides familiar with the upper forest terrain. And because apparently this was non-negotiable, Emma, Thomas, and Sophie would come along with their badgers. "For safety," Margaret explained, completely seriously. "The children are for safety," I repeated, just to make sure I understood correctly. "Well, yes. The badgers keep them safe, and honestly, if something is going to go wrong, it is better to have the badgers there." I slept poorly that night. My dreams were filled with visions of earth mammals with ridiculous names facing down impossible predators, while small humans ate sandwiches and rated the entertainment value. Dawn came too quickly. Our expedition group assembled at the forest's edge. Myself, Vreenak, 2 other researchers, Marcus and another farmer named Chen, and the 3 children with their badgers. Mr. Patches had a tiny backpack with supplies. Colonel Mustard wore what appeared to be a bandana. Admiral Butterscotch had a camera strapped to his harness because Sophie wanted documentation of the awesome fight that is definitely going to happen. We entered the Murderwoods just as the sun cleared the horizon. The upper forest was different from the lower regions where Emma had walked. The trees were older, thicker, their canopy so dense that little light penetrated. The undergrowth was sparse but treacherous, hiding sinkholes and root systems that could snap an ankle. The badgers led the way. They moved with purpose, sniffing the air, reading signs invisible to my sensors. The children followed, chatting about school and games and completely ignoring the fact that we were walking into potential doom. We found the first sign of the Dreadmaw 2 hours in. A tree, easily 4 meters in diameter, had been knocked over. Not cut, not burned, simply pushed over like a toy. The claw marks on the trunk were each as long as my forearm. Vrynak's antennae drooped. That is a very large creature. Told you, Sophie said cheerfully. Dreadmaws are huge. The badgers studied the marks, made some chittering sounds among themselves, then continued forward. We followed, because at this point, what else could we do? The second sign was a half-eaten thornback. Just the bones, picked clean, arranged in a way that suggested the Dreadmaw had fed methodically, efficiently. The third sign was the smell. A musk so powerful it made my eyes water, marking territory, declaring ownership of this entire region. And then we found the Dreadmaw itself. It was sleeping in a clearing, and Sophie had not been exaggerating. It was massive, easily twice the size of a thornback, with armor-like plates covering its shoulders and spine. Its claws, currently retracted, were still visible, gleaming like polished obsidian. Its breathing created a wind that rustled the surrounding vegetation. "Okay," Marcus whispered. "We've seen it. Time to leave." Quietly. The badgers had other ideas. All 3 of them, Mr. Patches, Colonel Mustard, and Admiral Butterscotch, walked directly into the clearing. They did not sneak. They did not hesitate. They walked up to the sleeping Dreadmaw like they had an appointment. "No, no," I hissed. But the children were already following their badgers. The Dreadmaw's eyes opened. They were golden, intelligent, and currently focused on 3 small mammals and 3 smaller humans who had invaded its space. It stood. The ground shook. It was even larger standing up. A mountain of muscle and fury, and evolutionary perfection designed for one purpose: dominating everything else. The badgers sat down in a neat row. The children stood behind them. Emma waved. "Hi. We're from the settlement down the mountain. Are you new here?" The Dreadmaw stared at her, then at the badgers, then back at Emma. Sophie pulled a notebook from her backpack. "We're doing a survey. We need to know your territorial range, your dietary requirements, and whether you plan to eat any of our livestock." The Dreadmaw made a sound. It was not a roar, not a growl. It was more like a confused rumble, as if the creature was trying to process what was happening. Thomas stepped forward. "Also, if you're the one who scared the Thornbacks into our agricultural sector, could you not do that? It is really disruptive, and my dad had to replant the entire south field." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab these insane children and run. I wanted to activate my ship's emergency teleporter and beam directly to the safety of space, but I could not move, because I was watching something impossible. The Dreadmaw, the apex predator of the apex predators, lowered itself. Not aggressively, not in preparation to pounce. It lowered itself to the ground, bringing its massive head level with the children. Admiral Butterscotch waddled forward and booped the Dreadmaw on the nose. Actually booped it. With his tiny badger paw. The Dreadmaw went cross-eyed looking at the paw, then made a sound that could only be described as a confused whimper. "See?" Sophie said triumphantly. "He's friendly." "That is not friendly," Vrynak whispered. "That is shock. That creature is experiencing existential shock." But Sophie was already petting the Dreadmaw's snout, and Emma was asking if it wanted some of her trail mix, and Thomas was explaining settlement boundaries using a stick to draw in the dirt. The Dreadmaw listened. I swear on every star in the galaxy, it listened. Its golden eyes tracked Thomas's stick, followed Emma's hand gestures, focused on Sophie's chatter about proper wildlife etiquette. And then, when the children were done with their presentation, the Dreadmaw nodded. It nodded. A gesture of understanding. Agreement. Compliance. The three badgers chittered approvingly, and we began the journey back to the settlement. Behind us, the Dreadmaw watched us go, then settled back into its clearing, apparently content to follow the rules as explained by three human children and their insane mammals. The walk back was quiet. Even the children seemed to sense that something profound had occurred. Marcus kept muttering calculations under his breath, probably figuring out new boundary markers. Chen was taking notes, already planning the report. I was trying to understand the fundamental nature of what I had witnessed. We emerged from the forest as the sun reached its peak. The settlement spread before us, peaceful and ordinary, completely unaware that its continued existence had just been negotiated by elementary school children, armed with nothing but confidence and 30 pounds of badger each. That night, I completed my report to the Galactic Biological Survey. I included all the data, all the footage, all the impossible observations. I detailed the predator hierarchy of New Manitoba, the role of Terran badgers in ecosystem management, and the phenomenon of apex predators deferring to human children. My conclusion was simple but revolutionary. Humans did not conquer death worlds through superior firepower or advanced technology. They conquered them through the strategic deployment of small, angry mammals and the absolute confidence that comes from never doubting that everything would work out fine. The survey board reviewed my report. They sent follow-up teams. They conducted independent studies. Every single one confirmed my findings. Within a year, New Manitoba was reclassified as a Class 1 minimal risk environment, not because the predators were gone, but because humans had somehow negotiated a peace treaty using badgers as interpreters. Other colonies began requesting badgers. The Terran government started a breeding program specifically for Death World settlements. Within 5 years, there were human children walking through the galaxy's most dangerous ecosystems, protected by mustelids with attitude problems, and the local wildlife was just accepting it as the new normal. I received a commendation for my work, an award for advancing xenobiological understanding, a promotion, but mostly, I received questions. From researchers, from government officials, from military strategists, all wanting to know the same thing. How did they do it? How did humans manage to turn apex predators into reluctant babysitters? The answer, as best I could determine, was simple. Humans looked at the universe's most dangerous creatures and said, "Yeah, but have you met my badger?" And somehow, impossibly, it worked. Because badgers were just crazy enough to fight anything, and predators were just smart enough to recognize that some battles were not worth fighting. I visited New Manitoba one last time before transferring to a new assignment. Emma was 8 now, still walking through the Murderwoods with Mr. Patches, who was getting gray around the muzzle but had lost none of his attitude. Thomas and Colonel Mustard were training younger children in proper wilderness etiquette. Sophie and Admiral Butterscotch had actually befriended the Dreadmaw, who now occasionally visited the settlement to trade information about distant territories for Sophie's homemade cookies. As I prepared to leave, Emma gave me a hug and Mr. Patches allowed me to pet his head, which I understood was a significant honor. "Will you come back?" Emma asked. "Perhaps," I said, "though I think you have things well in hand here." "Yeah," she agreed. "But it was nice having someone to explain stuff to. Most people just think it is normal." That was the thing, though. For them it was normal. For humans, walking through death worlds with badgers, negotiating with apex predators, turning impossible situations into casual afternoon strolls, that was just Tuesday. As my shuttle lifted off, I looked down at New Manitoba one last time. The Murderwoods stretched to the horizon, filled with creatures that could kill in 1,000 creative ways, and scattered throughout were children, walking with their badgers, completely safe because evolution had created the perfect predator. And then humanity had domesticated something crazier. The galaxy would never be the same. And honestly, it was probably for the better. Somewhere in the Murderwoods, a Thornback Grizzly was probably teaching her cubs to recognize badger patterns and give them a wide berth. A shadow cat was likely adding small mammals with bad attitudes to its list of things to avoid. And a Dreadmaw was definitely enjoying cookies while a bad attitude. 12-year-old girl explained the importance of respecting agricultural boundaries. This was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not weapons, not technology, but the absolute audacity to make friends with chaos and then let their children take it for walks. And the truly terrifying thing? It was working.